Invisible Experts Podcast.
Welcome everyone. Welcome to this season 3 of this Invisible Expert Podcast, a special edition actually aligned with our forthcoming book, Cultural Perspective on Organizational Sustainability, Traditional Practice for Modern Challenges. This season, we're going to try to go beyond conventional ideas of sustainability. Instead, we journey into the ancestral philosophies, cultural traditions, and community-based knowledge systems that have quietly shaped resilient societies for centuries and which hold transformative lessons for the organizations of today. Across this season, we will explore how diverse cultural frameworks are, such as Buen Vivir, Vanua, Waqf, Duchas, Seva, Akan Wisdom, Confucian Ethics, Rastafari, and Higi, offer powerful alternatives to dominant extractive models of leadership and development. Each conversation invites us to rethink what it means to build organizations rooted in care, reciprocity, kinship, stewardship, and deep purpose. Our guests are practitioners, thinkers, academics, and community leaders who bridge the worlds of ancient knowledge and modern organizational practice. They will help us to understand how ancestral wisdom is not merely historical, but a living, adaptive, and essential guide for addressing today's ecological, social, and spiritual challenges. And so, to open this session, we are honored to welcome my good friend, Davinia Vella, who brings rich insights from working alongside First Nation communities in Australia, exploring philosophies, perhaps such as Dadirri, deep listening, country as a kin, kinship governance, cultural enterprise, language, revitalization, women-led leadership, regenerative land care, and co-design community development. I think her perspective is going to be beautiful because it reflects the heart of this new season. Hello, Davi. How are you? Welcome to this podcast.
Hello, Andres. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to see you and also to contribute to this. I dial in today from Gubbi Gubbi country, which is also known as the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and I acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and this water where I play and I work. And I thank the Gubbi Gubbi people for taking care of these lands for thousands and thousands of years. And I hope that we can keep up the custodianship of this land.
Wow, that's very exciting. But listen, before everything, I would like to know a little bit about you. I think the audience would be very excited to know who is Davi, who is that strong woman, an academic, entrepreneur, community leader behind. Where are you from and how you basically landed in Australia?
Yes, so I am originally from Malta, where I spent my first 30 years of life. And then I migrated to Australia, specifically the Sunshine Coast. I was always really drawn to this region. There's something extremely healing about this place. And when I first arrived here, I didn't know anything about that. I just thought this was a really nice spot where we've got white sand beaches and beautiful mountains and rainforest in the background. So I would really like to make this very evident that I am a migrant here. I do not speak for any First Nations people, and this is just my experience from living here and learning and unlearning a lot of what I knew before. So I would really like to make that clear. In my practice as a community development worker, I make that extremely clear that my knowledge comes from my experience, and I cannot speak for other people's experience. I also come from, I am a migrant, as I said, and I have also grown in relative privilege in the fact that, I've always had education. I've always had everything I needed. So this is not my lived experience to be a First Nations Australian person, and I would never in any way want to speak on behalf of a First Nations person. However, I can share my experience about being a migrant here and being extremely welcomed by the First Nations community here, the Gubbi Gubbi people, and also the land. in on where I now call home. It's very interesting because I feel an extremely deep connection to this place because of what I have learned from the mob here, also because which has, funnily enough, made me feel a better connection to my own homeland. Because when I'm there now, I can connect to that same spirit of the land and actually, um, yeah, feel very different about also, the land that I call home and where I come from.
That's
I
fantastic.
arrived in Australia about 15 years ago, and it's been a challenge in many ways. As migrants do, you're an international person yourself. It takes a while to settle. However, yes, this place speaks to me deeper than than just being a place where I call home now. So.
Thank you. That's very insightful. And actually, I really like how you put it, no? This kind of spiritual dimension that sometimes we tend to forget, right? And I think when we, have the privilege to spend time to work with indigenous communities, First Nation communities, natives across the lands, they kind of share that. No, there's such a special connection beyond, maybe this rational that we are used to it. That's why I'm very excited about this project, about this book that we're gonna publish all together, because we're gonna have this opportunity to learn a little bit more. And also for our audience, I really like what you said before. You don't pre you know you don't pretend to talk or speak on behalf of them. You only want to share your experience, and as an academic, you're gonna try to put everything together, respecting and acknowledging what indigenous communities bring into the table, isn't it? So before we move on into the actual, academic framework or conceptual topics about it, I want to ask you about these spiritual side, because I think this is something very important that our audience have to, maybe learn about. So before you arrived to Australia, how was your relationship with the land, or your perception about nature, and whether or not it changed throughout the time by having spent time with the First Nation communities?
Yes, you were right. It has changed a lot. So coming from Malta, I must admit that, there's not much nature there. So there's not many trees and there's not much of a natural environment. There is obviously like the sea, and I've always felt very connected to that. And I have always been a spiritual person, so it's not like I'm walking into this with, zero concept of kind of meditation or connection to spirit or anything like that. But coming here on this land and the first few years, I can't really say that it was any different. I mean, I just thought it was really beautiful. Then I uh, I had a client who was a First Nation social enterprise, because obviously I was already working with social enterprises, and as you know, in Australia, all Aboriginal businesses are considered social enterprises, and we'll talk more about that on how that happens. Um, and being my typical European, very uninformed self when I had first arrived here, this was probably 3 years after I arrived, and I was working with the social enterprise, and I I look back with a little bit of shame on this moment because yeah, I was typing away and I'm having a grumble about how there's no history in Australia. And how, I come from Europe and we've got all these beautiful buildings and, we've got all these stories of conquests and like, all these things, but there's not so, there's nothing of like that in Australia. And the lady I work for, Terry, who is the founder of an organization called Sevgen, she turns around to me and with the sweetest voice, she didn't want to embarrass me or anything. She goes, Davinia, you are forgetting that Australia has got a black history. And Andreas, I felt this small. Here I was, all enlightened and, social enterprise, blah, blah, blah. And I was not acknowledging 35,000 years of
Mm.
continuous history with my, colonial mentality that whatever is white is not relevant. I think that was the start of my appreciation for First Nations culture, and also when I started my unlearning process and being okay with that, being okay with the fact that everything I have been taught might not actually be relevant in this context just now. And that's really confronting, especially coming from a Western perspective where you're taught that your degrees are making you more experienced or more intelligent or more able to have an opinion about something than someone else. And I think that was the first step in a very humbling few years that came after that, where I had to take a step back, really understand what co-design means, because co-design is messy, expensive, takes time, and you have to be really open to follow it up, because it's not just a consultation. Consultation's easy. Implementing that and actually co-designing something, especially when it comes to development or when it comes to projects or even economic development, that's a really big thing, that in social enterprise with First Nations, you're co-designing economic solutions, and
Mm.
they might look very different than what you originally thought it was going to be. And being able to sit with that in that uncomfortableness of being like, I have no idea how this is going to work. How are we going to, um, how are we going to give reverence or acknowledge like a, a, a natural process while I don't know, like there's just so many, there's a lot of, um, it comes head to head with what you've been taught before. So I think unlearning and turning up with an open heart and not having preconceived ideas is probably one of the best lessons I've been taught in this space.
Anyway, and I think this is one of the biggest challenge, right? I mean, as wish, I mean, I think, maybe we should land there with an open mind, maybe blank canvas, but it doesn't work like this. I mean, we have kind of the
You
chip on the
cannot.
shoulder, the way that we, grew up, we were brought up by our community, our country. Sometimes it's hard to understand them, right? Thinking like them, I think is a big challenge. And it happened to me as well. Like, even though I consider myself to be a native Colombian, right? But having spent with indigenous communities, which have been there for years, and centuries, and they have their own worldview, how they operate, how they think, is hard for us. You know, I think it's also a beautiful challenge, as you put it, unlearn and to start to think in a different way,
And
which
and
is great.
challenges where the magic happens. The magic, the most amazing solutions don't happen if you're not thinking outside of the box. So this is a great opportunity for all of us in this space to, take off the hats that we've been wearing before. And in your notes, there's also a big part about listening, and listening is, the nonviolent practice of letting all your guards down and being open to what comes up.
Of
Not
course.
having preconceived ideas, not waiting for your turn to kind of say your view, just listening. And listening can be really hard, especially when you come from a solution solving background, and as workers in the space, because I call myself a community worker. I still call myself a community worker because that's what I love to do most.
Yeah, of
So
course.
all of my other titles, that's my favorite one because I love community. I love the fact that, I feel privileged that I'm allowed to contribute in the forming of communities or solutions coming from communities. And to me, it's more important that I allow that solution to come out of that community and then help make it a reality rather than come in with a pre-established plan or a project that's already funded, and then I just have to tick boxes to, get to um, what I need to do because of the money kind of thing. So it it and I guess that's where it doesn't fit in the whole established systems that we already have. So, in community development or in other areas, you apply for funding, you get that funding, and then you have to deliver something exactly that matches that funding agreement, and then you kind of sign off on it and it's done. And that's completely the opposite of First Nations philosophies, where it's not outcome based, it's relation based. And how do you measure a relationship? You cannot have it's very hard um, to measure those relationships and what they're going to do. Also,
Mm,
time. We're saying that, let's say you get funding for a year or 2 years, and then you have to measure the impact that has occurred in those 2 years. But if you are actually basing your practice on relationship, then you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know that, if two people have had a cup of tea and then they got together 5 years later and then they started a business. So even the construct of time, measurement, outcomes, that doesn't fit in this context. So it makes it quite problematic when you're dealing with bureaucracy and systems that are outside of people's control to even do the work in this space.
mm. Fantastic. Just to contextualize a little bit, so who are these First Nations communities in Australia? I mean, I suppose there are a lot of them. Australia is a massive country with different geography, you know. So, more or less, if you know what is the context.
Australia has over 2,000 mobs, 2,000 different cultural groups. They have
Wow.
over 700 languages, and I'm not even sure on the actual, I would have to look it up. But as far as I like, there's amazing diversity between groups, and this is also a challenge. So,
Hmm.
when there's land rights, there are groups and mobs between themselves that actually come into conflict because there's and that's why it doesn't fit in the space. Colonial powers like drawing lines, and I remember when I was very young and I noticed the lines, and I think I was in a geography class or a history class, and I'm like, what's with all the lines? Who drew the lines? Like, what happened? Why the lines? And my teacher at that time said every time there's a straight line, there's usually a conflict. And it makes perfect sense because people don't organize themselves in straight lines. No one's coming to draw a line between a village and saying that this is, so there's mountain ranges maybe that, separate geographical areas or rivers that maybe contain communities, but lines, lines
No,
came
no,
later,
yeah.
right?
That's
So,
a good
um,
point. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
so
these
you've got
boundaries, yeah, that they were brought about, throughout colonialism, you know,
their man-made
it's an
boundaries.
evidence. Yeah, yeah, of course. It's evidence. And also, as you put it beautifully, like there is so much diverse among themselves, until maybe I would say 20th century, we would referring to them as indigenous people, are putting them in the same bag and in the same package. But then when you go throughout and you travel throughout, you see there are a lot of cultural differences among themselves, right?
Yes. And this is a reflection of mine, but with First Nations like Aboriginal mobs, they're so in touch with the land and their environment that they are as diverse as the Australian landscape is. And the Australian landscape is extremely diverse. So, where I live, it's all beach and rainforest, but there are snowy mountains and there's islands that are barren, and there's just so much diversity in the environment here, and it reflects the the mobs and the groups that have formed in that space, which is also has created a really big problem with governance and representation. So
Mm.
even when recently we had the referendum called The Voice, and The Voice was The Voice was all about putting in place a First Nations organization that will have a voice. No one actually knew what the voice would be, or if the voice was going to be determining of any laws or of any policies, but that there'd be a continuous First Nations organization outstanding outside of the two-party system, so no one could take it away, because in the history of Australia, we've seen the Labor government putting in, um, Aboriginal organizations and then being removed by later administrations. So what the Voice wanted to do was to establish this independent Aboriginal-led organization that would always have a voice on policy that is affecting First Nations people. Not even First Nations people among themselves could agree that this is a good solution. And the
Mm.
moment there was cracks within that, obviously, the people that did not believe, that did not agree with it, just attacked that and said, oh, if Aboriginal people don't even want this, then this must be a really bad thing. Because it's really hard to get consensus with such a diverse group of people. And then
100%.
there's also, misinformation and the rhetoric was just absolutely ridiculous, really. There were people saying that Australia was going to split in two and that there's going to be two governments and it's going to be, and it was none of that. All it was an organization of Aboriginal appointed people by Aboriginal people that would then have a voice. The only thing that was was really not in favor of that was the fact that even that system was actually being proposed by Anglo-Australians. So it wasn't even something that had come up from First Nations people. There was still this colonizer mentality that, yes, maybe what you need is an organization. And an organization will settle all our problems in like that. So again, just stepping back from like decolonizing the process of integrating First Nations people or, having a cohesive society with everyone else is is quite challenging and hard within the bureaucratic systems of Western government. However, that's
Mm.
what we have, and that's also really good because democracy serves us well. So what does the future look like? How do we work together to, have something that's representative of all Australians?
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I've read something about it. I'm not an expert on it, but it's true. I mean, still in this century, we're talking about giving or, allowing, minorities to speak about themselves. Let's allow them to organize when they've been organized for centuries, even before the arrival of them, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. So, David, to
Exactly.
begin with, could you share a little bit about your journey working alongside First Nations communities and how you understand of indigenous sustainability philosophies and how perhaps it has evolved?
Sure. So, as I said, most of my experience has been in this area, and it is not a greatly populated area by Aboriginal people. However, we are extremely respectful of the mob here. So, something that I absolutely love and that I've seen change in the last 15 years. We did not used to do this in Australia before. That, for example, before every meeting, we acknowledge country. And and we acknowledge the elders of this land. And that's actually really important. One, because we are acknowledging that we are on someone else's land. And this all kind of came after the Rudd government declared a public apology to Indigenous people, which was a really good step in the right direction. So that's one of the things that we do here that I really, really like. A beautiful friend of mine, she is a First Nations lady from Mission Beach, from Diribal country, and she has given probably one of my most favorite acknowledgements to country. So basically, just to step back, an acknowledgement is when you are not actually from the land, but you are just acknowledging the land, when a welcome is given by people from the land. So I cannot give a welcome, but a Gabi Gabi person from this region could give a welcome to country. But an acknowledgement is also beautiful because, and how my friend put it, Aisha, is that you are not just acknowledging that this land is Gabi Gabi land and that this is beautiful country and there was ancestors and elders that have taken care of this land, but you are also acknowledging that you are part of this land, that I am also Kabi Kabi water. I am also Kabi Kabi soil. I am also, because there's that concept of non-separation from your environment. I am just as much here in this environment. I am the environment here because I am here. So I'm just as much part of this land as a tree would be because I am here. So there's less separation between your natural environment and yourself. And I love that concept because then it goes into if I am part of this environment and I am as much belonging here as the tree that has been here for 200 years, and the water that courses through my veins because I've drank out of the tap is the same water that the tree is getting, or the air that's going through my lungs is the same, air that the oxygen that the tree has just used up. Then how beautiful is it with our community? How at one are we really? And we are. There is not a lot of separation. Skin is impermeable, like skin is permeable, sorry, like the air is recycled, right? The water particles are the same. So that concept of being part of your environment and your community and not being separate is probably one of the bases of a lot of First Nations beliefs, where if I am hurting someone, I'm also hurting someone I love, or if I'm hurting a tree, I'm also, creating uh, I'm also hurting my community. There is no separation between the people, the land, the other tribe, because we are all on this one land. And I'm not sure I'm making this justice, but maybe I can clarify some parts of it
No,
that
no, but I get it. I mean, basically, what you're trying to say is that approach to sustainability is not even in question because they are part of it. They are
exactly.
unified. Yeah, I mean, in general, indigenous communities tend to be biocentric. Hence, for them, nature is above all, but they are part of them. So they need to contribute, like a good cell who nurture their surrounding. I mean, it make a perfect sense. And this is
And
what is
then it goes to
interesting
also
about it. Yeah.
taking care of the people in your community. It also means that the trouble and the challenges that the homeless person sleeping by the creek is going through is also part of me. And I mean, we can go into spirituality and the energetic resonance of that too, and that makes that's a different level. I don't know how to speak about that academically, but that it kind of goes into that space too. That you know the person that's struggling the most in your community is also your responsibility, and which is why we see that in and this happens even today, even in not tight-knit Aboriginal and First Nations community, they take care of each other. And if one of them is doing well and is making money, then there's an assumption that that money is going to be shared. And much unlike in a Western sense where we're really individualistic and we really want to do things by ourselves, and if we're struggling, we won't reach out. And First Nations, and again, generalization, obviously not everyone's the same, but you hear it a lot that when someone's doing well, they're getting phone calls from their family because everything is shared. The good times are shared, the bad times are shared, and we're all in this together. So
But
it's
at
nice.
this, I think this is like a very simple principle, right? And if you do well, it's because there is something around you who is allowing it and helping it to do well. No man is an island, no better said, right? Everything is connected. I really like this kind of profound and spiritual dimension because this is what we miss. This kind of lack of capacity, if you wish, that we have from the Western world to understand that everything is connected, nothing is separated. You know, we are interconnected, and throughout this interconnectedness, we are all one. And I think they're still doing it, they're still practicing. Of course, not everybody is like the same, but there is a tendency to to practice reciprocity, solidarity, and so on and so forth. So your examples
Yes,
are super interesting. So you have engaged closely with First Nation social entrepreneurs and cultural practitioners. So can you please maybe share some of the most transformative experience or lessons in this work throughout the years?
sure. There's been a lot, and it's been a pleasure to witness and to be able to work in this space. Um, for example, um, I'll start with Sevgen because they were my first experience in the space, and um, it it was probably the most challenging because I did not know what to expect. And I think when you come from a Western perspective, if someone doesn't give you timelines, if someone doesn't give you instructions, it just feels it just feels really ungrounding at first because you don't know. And then as I worked there longer and I started to understand First Nations culture a little bit more, I realized that it was actually a blessing. And what I was being given was complete free reign to bring to life, what had to come. And that's also kind of a practice from the listening as well, because when you're listening with no preconceived ideas or not waiting to talk next or forming ideas into your head but just quietly listening, putting your head to a clear space and just letting things through, then the solution will unfold. And it I guess even in that space very early on, it was not my job to find the solution. It was my job to let the solution emerge.
Mm,
And I think as Westerners, sometimes we don't have the belief and the trust that the solution will emerge. We're rushing
mm.
in, right? We're rushing in with solutions and like, yeah, let's do this and let's do this and then we can do. And just to be able to let that flow is very uncomfortable and very
Yeah.
scary because you don't know, right? You don't know. You don't know if it's gonna come up. You don't know. But when you take away time and you put it in the construct of the sun will come up tomorrow and everything will, yeah, this is not really that important in the whole concept of yeah, it's not.
100%. That's crazy, isn't it? Like how simple it is. I mean, the rest doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It's crazy.
It will
Yeah.
come. It will come. We've been here long ago. We found solutions. It will come. And to be able to trust in that, that's a really big thing. However, I guess the social enterprise movement and the First Nations business space in Australia has taken a big step forward because those values could be merged with some really good defining basis of Australian society as well. And when I was at the Social Enterprise World Forum in September, no, October it was,
Mm,
um, I was actually really pleasantly surprised, and that's when it finally sunk in for me that, of course, it's not perfect. Of course, we have a really, really long way to go. We're definitely not there. But in the Australian context, there was magic that did not happen in other, or at least from what I could see over there. with other First Nations people. Or maybe we didn't have some like a massive representation, but what became evident was that there's certain aspects in Australian society, like equity in healthcare, free education, social mobility, um, being able to move and learn and explore. And we also have kind of a culture of, yeah, you can have a go, have a go kind of thing. And it doesn't need to be perfect, just have a go. And that has actually allowed First Nations businesses to develop in this space and to be able to have a go. Because in the Anglo Australian system, you would not have been able to get any further if there was not some First Nations people that, could go to university and had access to that, and were integrated more in the Western culture so that they could bridge that gap. And this is the interesting part, because I mean, obviously, everyone knows that women, girls tend to do very well academically from a very young age. And this also happened obviously in the First Nations with First Nations peoples. So it's and this is my observation, but I think if I had to research it, I would find that it's pretty on point. Um, that because the girls could access that education and then could become a little bit more academic and kind of could align more to those business, like, traditional business practices, and kind of, wrap their mind around that, then they became leaders within their community because they could then make money, start businesses, create employment, find more opportunities. So, yeah, it's been really interesting to see, and I definitely need to explore that more and kind of go more into and research that a little bit more. It's also part of my PhD that I've got quite a few First Nations social entrepreneurs that are involved in my research, and it's it's really, really fun to see and interesting to see how, yeah, because there's been, more of access, more of this kind of academic push for women, then it has positioned them to become economic and also cultural leaders within their community. Having said that, First Nations women have always had a main place in cultural leadership. I
Okay.
wouldn't say it's a feminist or like system, because there's still some parts that are, considered probably quite sexist in it. There's some practices that in the traditional context might seem extremely misogynist for, a Western woman. But there's definitely more of an acceptance to female leadership in that space. And I think because of this ability to be able to understand the Western systems more, there's I'm very pleasantly surprised with that, and I love noticing that. Some other social enterprise in that space that I have been exposed to. Um, um, would be Yes, I've had great good contact with a linguist who's amazing. He's a prodigy. He's an elder and he's only about 35 years old. So that's another different thing where age doesn't really come into the fact if you're an elder or an emerging elder or not, because yeah, wisdom is recognized. And I like the phrase where knowledge talks, wisdom listens, and
Mhm.
it makes it you can tell, because from my experience, again, this is all kind of my experience in with First Nations people, the person that's in charge, or the person with the most power is probably the person that's speaking the least at anything. It's like-
Wow.
and it's almost like they can just hold that power without the big chit chat and making a big show of themselves because they've got nothing to prove. It, it's internal. It's an embodied power. Like um it's a power that's not taken, probably. That's why it's a power that's given out of respect. So there's no need to grab at it. It's you know, it's like an aura almost. So it's been really, really beautiful to be able to witness that. There's some other great social enterprises that have gone quite large. There's the burning one, so they do, I think it's called Burn, and they do cultural burning. So as you know, Australia has got a fire season that can be very devastating. And First Nations people knew about this. They have been managing fires for a very long time. So long that we have plants in Australia that will only germinate through a fire. So, these things have been managed for a very long time. Um, yeah, this group goes out and burns, like controlled burns the land with their amazing traditional wisdom of where the wind is blowing and kind of where it's gonna go. And they're ceremonial fires basically, and they have like a spiritual opening to it. This is something that so I guess even now that we've put acknowledgements and welcome to countries into our day-to-day activities, um, it has added a layer of spirituality before a meeting starts. Everybody's quiet and hears the acknowledgement and then reflects on the land and the connection to it. And that makes meetings go so much better. Everybody's in the room, everybody's attention is in the room. So not only are we doing this to acknowledge the traditional people, but we're also doing it for our own spiritual well-being and awareness and bringing the consciousness into the room, which I think makes for much better outcomes.
So
We've
would you
got
say, like First Nation businesses can be considered social enterprises?
Yes, yes, Australian law recognizes that too. And that has been great for First Nations businesses because it's almost given them uh,
Platform, no? Like,
not just a platform, but also oh my God, I lost the word, um, like permission. It has
okay,
given them permission to bring their cultural values into business.
wow,
And that was, I
okay.
don't think that was there legally before, right? Before it was business. And there was no concept of, social enterprise or business for good or impact through your business. It was business for money. That's what most people think business is.
So
Um,
from your perspective, yeah, having worked with them, having read, extensively about this kind of sector, what makes indigenous led enterprises distinct in its purpose, governance, and impact models among the other type of business? What do you think?
so something that a lot of indigenous business people say that they make decisions thinking about 7 generations in the past and 7 generations in the future.
Wow.
So obviously it complicates every single decision that you make. However, um, to have the foresight of pulling in on your ancestral wisdom and then thinking about the 7 future generations and how that is going to affect them.
Okay.
That's kind of, the basis of a lot of decision making. It's impact and ancestral wisdom molded into your present moment at every time. So it's almost like the most I like to think about it as actually social enterprises going back to traditional practices. Yeah, the Maori people do the same, and I think this was the first time that I had encountered this type of philosophy around business practices too. When this is how trade has always been done before capitalism kind of came along, where everything is being considered. If we are going to trade, I don't know, a bag of millet, or well, millet is one of the grains that is now up and coming in Australia as a traditional grain that's being brought back. Um, you're considering if you can actually trade this bag of millet, or if you're going to have enough rain coming, not just just selling it and giving it away. So when you're making decisions, thinking about the land, your community, the wisdom that you got, and how it's going to affect future generations, then it's basically social enterprise. And it was very, very insightful of the government to actually recognize that.
Mhm. That's interesting. So this is actually leads and open the door for that opens the door for philosophies, core philosophies. How they think. So I don't know if you are familiar with. Maybe there are many cultural traditions. One of the most powerful concepts which I've read about is something which is called Dadirri. I don't know if I pronounce it well.
Theory.
It's kind
Yeah.
of deep listening. You know. So how do you see this Dadirri informing modern organizational practices, leadership, or even conflict resolution, which for me resonates what you just mentioned. It's like
Yeah.
think holistically, right? From
Yeah,
different
exactly.
dimensions.
And we know that First Nations people have been doing this for forever. Because one of the things that, some of the only, no, not only, there's quite a few actually now we're finding more and more, but traditionally what we call a yarning circle is found in when archaeologists dig up, First Nation settlements from ancient times. It's one of the things that they find, which is a yarning circle. And in a yarning circle, everybody's equal. So a yarn means having a chat, like having a talk. It's still language that is used nowadays with First Nations and also Australian people. Um, and the idea of a yarning circle is that everybody is sitting around the circle and everybody is seen and everybody has got equal importance. So it's a horizontal concept where everybody matters. How we do that in today's organizations, I mean, we're bringing that back a lot, with co-design practices, with um, this big movement of not for us without us. And it's basically that you do not do anything for First Nations people unless they are there involved and leading it. And this is a
Mm,
concept that's now really taking on. And because again, we're trying to decolonialize the services and the work that we do with First Nations people, because there's been this whole idea that oh, white saviors, we're going to come in and we're gonna do all this, and oh, you're going to be saved, and like you're going to be so much better off now, you're going to have all this money, and that doesn't work. It doesn't work time and time and time again because we are not listening. We're just barging in there with solutions and thinking that we know better. But so when you step back and you do the listening without any preconceived ideas, in a yarning circle where everyone's equal and you include as many people as you possibly can, or whose views that you really want to hear. What happens after the yarning and after the listening is not even coming up with solutions straight up. Then there's a brewing process. Then you go away, you go for a walk, you go into nature, and then you come back with the solution. Then you come back where you hear everybody and kind of come back with something that can then be discussed again. Obviously, it's extremely frustrating for a Westerner because there could be no time limits to this. And there could be there could be things that happen. Sorry business, for example, where somebody dies and people go for walkabouts, and again, that's got no time. Grief has got no concept of time. And
mm,
it's a system that allows for true healing and true well-being. But in a Western system where everything is timed and fined, and it it clashes with the system, which is why we see that there's intergenerational disadvantage happening and happening, even though the government has I like to think of Australia as like a rich parent that just throws money at its problems without actually listening. And it doesn't, or, I think we're getting a little bit better at that, but still there's, this whole, oh yeah, let's just throw money at it. Yeah, money. Yeah, let's just throw money at it. But then what you end up with is horrible stories, like a story that is stuck in a lot of people's heads. It's like, oh, the government builds houses for Aboriginal people and then they burn them and they put a fire in the middle of it. And it's like, yeah, maybe that has happened somewhere, but that's not that's not happening all the time. And also, were houses what those First Nations people actually wanted? Maybe they didn't want houses. Maybe they just wanted to live with the trees. And yeah, so there's that. And there are organizations now like First Nations Economics, our friend Rick, that is quite superstar, um, and they're changing that. They're bringing First Nations people to the decision-making places where it really matters and bringing those voices to the tables where they really need to be heard. Um, how successful that is, it's a work in progress. We don't go from 0 to 100 in 1 year. So, social change takes generations, but at least we're aware and we're doing it. So that I think that's good.
Wow. So basically, like this deep listening is like what? Like, this kind of concept.
Deep listening is, yeah, just going in with an open heart and an open soul. And there's not, and yeah, not coming out with a quick solution or and then kind of starting the process. It's not just the listening is really important also because there's a um there's a process to the healing that we're going through as a nation.
Mm,
And part of it is the storytelling. And there's a particular word for it that's escaping me right now. Um, it's the retelling of the pain. And the
wow.
pain needs to sit somewhere. And I feel that this kind of comes from the idea that trauma needs to be talked about before it is completely released. And uh, it seems to be a practice with First Nations people that they need to talk about what has happened. They need to bring up their sorry stories, they need to bring up the pain. And it's very confronting for most Australians because most Australians are like, well, I wasn't there harming you. I wasn't there pushing your mob out off a cliff. We next to where I live, there's a place called Murdering Creek. And it's called Murdering Creek for a reason, because it's where thousands of Aboriginal people have been
Throughout, yeah.
throughout the time. Um, and this was not long ago, Andreas. This was less than 200 years ago, right? This could have been even about 70 years ago. It's not long ago. Up until 50 years ago, Aboriginal people could not even cross the Brisbane Bridge. This is very recent. So there's a lot of
Mm,
reconciliation happening. There's a lot of pain that still needs to come out and be acknowledged. And I don't feel that, I mean, I think First Nations people could be really freaking angry at white Australians, right? I mean, they could be, but that's not what they're presenting. They're presenting we just want to be heard. We want our stories to be heard. We want our heritage and our culture to be acknowledged. And also, we want to live in peace with everyone else. And I don't think that's a lot to ask for.
mm.
It doesn't cost us much to be hearing a story that makes us feel a bit uncomfortable because yeah, we're actually reaping the benefits of that pain. So let's acknowledge it and
That's
then
so true, man. And it happens in like in many, many different regions and countries, right? You have this kind of massive white elephant in the room who nobody talks about it, or they don't want to basically talk about it because it's uncomfortable. So as you said before, the typical parent that, okay, I'm not present with my children. So the best way to make this up for is just throwing away money and then yeah, you shut it. Go buy your stuff, build houses, let's build roads, and don't complain about it because I don't want to listen to it. I don't want to face it to it. It's so true. So yeah, and I think this kind of concept of Dadirri, deep listening, connects what you just said before. Knowledge talks, wisdom listens. So to listen and to be an active listener, you need to go far beyond. You need to have empathic skills. You have to acknowledge that perhaps you're gonna listen something that you don't like, and you have to basically like get away with it and suck it
Yeah.
up, basically, right?
And be okay with the uncomfortableness. Be okay that not all feelings are gonna feel good, and that's okay too. We're
Yeah.
gonna, you're gonna survive this moment. With that life does not have to be all shiny and pretty all the time and glossy. There are some moments that are really horrible and tragic, and we just still need to acknowledge them. And Australian, and as a migrant, I can say this that um, Australian culture is built a lot around kind of um, the British element of non-confrontation and kind of
Yeah.
not um, not wanting to have the hard conversations. But without
Yeah,
the hard
100%.
conversation, there's no going to something deeper. And if we want something deeper, which is what First Nations people want, an acknowledgement that there is a deeper level to this, that it's not just it's not just roads and cars, and there is a deeper knowledge here, there's a deeper connection, then we are going to have to go through some really uncomfortable moments together.
It's true. And actually, like having said that, the Westerners have the tendency to not having this kind of like skill of adaptability, and they are basically not comfortable to work in a different template. They don't. They simply want us to use their template, and we have to adapt to it. And I think for
Yeah.
many years, which is very impressive, it's like nowadays we have tremendous organizations. They make money, they make impact, they work for the nature, they work for the community, working in their template. No, not in the First Nations template, which is a little bit more more complex, because
Yeah.
basically you need other type of skills to deal with it, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and
very.
it complicates things. So, for example, at the moment there's a big movement to for psychedelic assisted therapy research, and First Nations people said, "Oh, actually, you can't be accessing that kind of spirituality and spiritual, delivery to people if we're not involved." So the research and the legislation was coming up pretty fast, and then First Nations people just went, "No, you can't do this without us," and stopped it. And there was this whole debate around what has happened in the medical marijuana industry, that just became it not a medicine at all. It just became a business. And yeah, First Nations people really stepped up and said, no, you can't do this work on this land if you're not going to do it in the right way. So yeah, there's been a whole reassessment of like how and when that's going to happen. And this is just purely medical and research. And we're seeing this happen in a few other places too, which I think is fantastic. Like,
mm.
just because that's the way we've done it here for, I don't know, 150 years, 200 years. I think we can do better. We can go deeper with things, and why not?
So in practice, how do you see this deep listening within the organizations? Like for someone who, maybe is too abstract. We both are very spiritual, we have many, many conversation about these. But for someone who, okay, listen, I want to learn how they work, how deep listening actually operates within the organizations or the First Nation organizations.
It can be confronting, and not all First Nations people are active in it either. It's I guess I bring some of my community development and in practice in it too, because that's something that's really close to my heart, and a lot about walking alongside people and not doing things for people but with people, or kind of taking a step back from that, and um, about leadership not having to be from the front, but leadership can be just from the side and supporting where it needs to go because we're not
Wow. Yeah,
doing
yeah,
this
yeah.
for us, right?
That's
We're
so different, though. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And the idea that if if as workers you're doing something for someone else and they don't have ownership of that, then it's gonna break down when you're not around. So even just the sustainability of the work that we're doing in that space, unless it's coming from community. There's this phrase that I really like that we use a lot. It says, when somebody is included, they feel like they belong. When somebody belongs, they contribute because they have ownership. So unless you create that belonging and ownership by acknowledging and including people, then whatever work you're doing in community is just going to fall apart. As soon as you don't have a project officer or someone that's paid to actually lead, that's all going to fall apart. So when you're working with communities, you're really building them up, doing what they feel that the community needs because they know better than you can ever know because they're living there. They've got lived experience. They're there on the ground. Plus, when you move away, they can continue because we're not in the space forever. I'm not sure if I've answered that question.
That's amazing. No, no, I love it. Actually, I was kind of writing it down. Yeah, about the inclusion, the feel of belonging, which is
Yeah.
great. There is a
And
tendency,
you see this in transient communities too. For example, I remember like something that always struck me about, for example, Brussels and Belgium, is that it's such a transient community that no one feels like they belong. So the place is it, th- there's no care for it. There's no care for what's going to happen next. It's like you're just living here at the moment. And you can feel this in some cities too, where if people are not feeling like they belong to the land and the community, then they're not volunteering. They're not picking up rubbish. They're not, putting beautiful murals on the wall or things like that, because it's just such a there's no belonging, and that sense of belonging, I reckon, is crucial in community building and sustainable communities that will stand the test of time.
that's very powerful. And I think based upon my experience, working with First Nation communities or indigenous communities, this is it. Feeling part of something, feeling part of my land, of my community. And like in Latin America, there is a lot of like land conflict. You know, usually the land is very rich in terms of minerals and, you know, natural resources and so on, and they are always under threat. And people don't get it. I mean, they are, no, no, let's move away. We make you a neighborhood, and you're gonna have this kind of, modern houses and, jacuzzi or swimming pool. Who cares? It's a part of belonging to someone, to so something that our generations been here for many, many years. And I think sometimes we fail to understand that, right? This is
Yeah.
crazy. I like that. So, indigenous Australians often, I don't know if I've read this, I don't know if it's true, describe country as kin, right? Is it true? Yeah.
Yes.
Implying this kind of relationship of family, reciprocity, and belonging, as we just
Yeah.
speak. How
And
can
and also the holistically being part of that country.
exactly?
Being one with country. Like there is no separation between people and trees or people and dirt, or I mean I mean that not in a disrespectful way, in
Yeah,
a
of
way that
course, of course. Yeah, yeah.
the earth is just as sacred as a person is.
So,
It's a
how
beautiful concept.
can recognizing country as a living relative, can reshape sustainability strategies for organizations? How do you see that?
It's well, we are part of this world. The
Mm,
we we are not saving the planet for the planet's sake. We're saving our environment. We are one with the planet. You know, if you look at us from outer space, we just look like one organism, right? If it hadn't been for the size, like this, if if the if the atmosphere goes, we all go. Like there's no separation of one person or another. It's not going to be like, the rich will survive or the animals will survive. We're all dead. So taking care of planet is like taking care of self, and taking care of self is also like taking care of planet. So that's flipped around as well, where not only are we doing a service to others, but how we behave in ourselves is actually a, a thing for the collective. And I'm not exactly sure kind of where this fits into, but I guess it would fit too. But I have not heard this specifically in Aboriginal First Nations like philosophies. But so it's more like a personal observation. But yeah, but because there's no separation, which is definitely a concept of First Nation spirituality, there's no separations between me and the land. So it goes both ways. Then there's my well-being is also part of the well-being of the land, which would have been extremely sad to see when First Nations people in Australia were massacred and treated so badly, because you can only imagine how that would have felt on the land as well, and how and how mining feels, for example, for an Aboriginal mob that has lived on that land for thousands of years, and then
Yeah.
mining company comes in and same as you're saying, oh, we'll move you, we'll give you duplexes and penthouses, and we'll just move you somewhere else, but um, you have completely crushed that spirit of that person that has felt so connected to the land, and that person will never be the same. And when you think about it, that is still happening today, let alone, in our collective consciousness of what has happened in the last 150 years. There's an estimate that
100%.
there was about 1 million Aboriginal people in Australia when white settlement came, and only 10% of them left at that point. So
Wow.
there was quite some big massacres that have happened here. This land, bears that energy too. So there is a lot that we still have to do in that space. It's so something that has happened recently is that organizations, mainstream organizations, everybody are being encouraged to have a reconciliation action plan, because obviously this is felt big in our culture. So a reconciliation action plan starts with a pledge, and then there are different levels of where you are in what we call the rep process. Um, the funny thing is that in traditional First Nations um, systems, um, there is no structured way of how you can get your rep. And this has been done on purpose, because there is no checklist. So when you're in a corporate, say you're in a big corporate and you're a people and culture person, and you're like, yes, we need to get our rep, because our rep will give us, an extra 10 points when we're putting in a tender, or it's going to make us more politically correct or what have you. So, but there is no checklist available of what you need to do to get this rep. Okay, the first one is you pledge, okay, you get your policies in place. Okay, that's easy. But then the next steps are really vague, because they're meant to be vague, because it's not meant to be tokenistic. So so you get a rep officer when you're applying for this, and it's big money and everything. And then they link you with your mob, or with the people, with the First Nations people in your area. And you're meant to spend time with those elders. You're meant to stop and listen and actually be in yarning circles with them. And it's not an hour or two. It can be 10 minutes if that's all the time they have. But it can also be days before they even speak to you. And you just sit there in silence, and you just have to be kind of okay with that. Another part of the rep is getting an art piece, an artwork from a First Nations artist that has spent time in your organization that then gives you a piece of art, which is also
Wow.
completely subjective, right? So it's a beautiful process because it's not tokenistic. It's really hard to understand. Like I've had conversations with people and culture directors, and they're just banging their heads, and they're like, "What do I do now? Like, the elder won't see me." And you keep trying. You keep
But if you
trying.
think
You
about
go.
it, but if you think about it, like even though it seems to be vague, you prove commitment, you proved innovation, you proved creativity, you know, you proved self-belonging. So if you actually think about it, this is a really good way to choose a rep, right? This kind of governance form, but they do that
It
because it's the
really
best
is.
way to do. You want to be a rep? Okay, prove it. Go and do a piece of art because it takes time. It
Yeah.
takes, it's an investment of your time to
Yeah,
do
and
something
it
for
you
the
have to show
rest.
up authentically to it. There's no way of bypass. I mean, of course, there's a way of bypassing, and there's a way of bypassing everything
Yeah,
in
I
life.
know.
But
Yeah.
the idea is that you turn up authentically, and that you genuinely want to have a reconciliation action plan as part of your organizational culture, and like you genuinely want to do this.
Wow. So when you work with First Nations enterprises, right? So do they actually like approach this kind of governance through what we just describing? Sense of responsibility, reciprocity, relational ethics, this kind of like 7 years before, 7 years in the future. So they do actually do that in their organizations or in our sort of.
I mean, obviously I have not been in every
Yeah, of course, of
organization
course.
and, everything is on a scale. Um, but yes, I've seen this in practice a lot. And fortunately or unfortunately, obviously the businesses, the First Nations businesses that most tend to do well in the Australian economic system are the ones that can adapt to the structure that's already there.
Yeah,
So
of
you will
course.
find that obviously those are doing much better. Um,
Yeah, but
accessing all the business and collaboration and for obvious reasons because those are the systems that are already in place. So unless you're somehow working within those systems, then you're not
yeah,
getting piece of the
100%.
pie.
Yeah, they have to like work in this kind of hybrid dimension. No? When they do
Yeah.
practice a little bit about themselves and the other thing. And actually it leads to my next question. You mentioned like having conversations with First Nation entrepreneurs delivering cultural training, right? What is that mean? Or what does entails for those who have no idea what cultural training is?
So
What basically you would learn.
yeah, yeah. So obviously, it can be quite frustrating for mainstream employers that are employing First Nations people. There's a sense of continued kind of racism and discrimination and preconceived bias that First Nations people are going to be like this or like this. Um, so cultural training basically helps employers and also staff within the organization to know more about what to expect. So, for example, things where people have sorry business, which is when somebody dies, or um, and they need to go for a walkabout, which is just going into the bush for an X amount of days, sometimes just by themselves. Sometimes no one knows where people go, but it's a cleansing and a healing process which makes, yeah, I mean, a lot of cultures actually do that. It's like a reset, right? So if you're grieving, you go into the bush, and then by the bush, I mean the forest, right? Um, and the forest will take care of you, and you will come back with some guidance. I mean, different First Nations cultures do that, sun gazing and like all kinds of different things. Um,
Which is like this kind of cultural burning, right? About the
yeah.
bush
Oh,
food enterprises, no?
yeah, no, this is everyone. This is just kind of just practice. So say I was an employer, and someone calls me up and says, "I've got sorry business. I'm going walkabouts," and you don't know when they're coming back.
Okay.
So
That's
in a Western
crazy.
concept, it can be very frustrating. You need more staff. You need to find, and then if somebody big dies in that community, then you might lose seven people. So it becomes quite problematic when you're dealing with teams. I was at a Work Integrated Social Enterprise conference in Melbourne that was delivered by Whitebox earlier in the year. And I went to a lot of the First Nations sessions because I'm just fascinated with it. And in the practical sense of things, this was a construction company saying, yeah, we need to take on 20% extra staff for when these things happen.
Okay.
So that becomes quite problematic. But on the other hand, um, if you are engaging with First Nation staff and you're retaining them well, then you're going to get a lot of loyalty. You're going to be allowed into communities. You're going to be given access to sites and areas that you didn't have before. And you're also providing employment and so there's a whole bunch of pros, but then there are some in you know
So, so basically, your staff, yeah, if they are First Nation, they say, okay, I'm gonna walk about, and you don't know when they're gonna arrive, or
you
they
don't
never
know when
do.
they're going to arrive, and when they come back they will expect their job back in the same position. So you can't actually give that job to somebody else because and these are
Mm.
just practicalities and incongruencies to the system that if you don't understand it, then you're going to fire that person, right? But if you have an understanding that this is what happens and that this is what this person needs to be able to turn up to work and have, their spiritual and mental well-being appreciated and kind of, continue within that company. So I guess cultural training is about debunking some myths, but
Yeah.
also about aligning expectations and kind of that these things are going to happen, and there are certain practices that um and look, mostly just business as usual, but yeah, these things happen. There's, for example,
Mm.
there's very significant delineations between what is women's business and men's business. And again, for us Westerners, that can be quite confronting. So women's business is not talked about in public. Women's business is gynecological problems, birthing, death. That's women's business, and the women take care of that, and it's handled by the women. And men don't get involved in that. That's no place where a man should be. But most most people kind of want the father of their baby there at birth. So so there's things like that that have been in a culture for a very long time that kind of come clash with how we are. And I guess in as an employer, you need to know those things and you need to have strategies on how to deal with them.
Yeah.
On the plus side, as employers, there's benefits to um, engaging First Nations people. There's
Yeah. They are
government
not
grants,
only
and
walkabouts, and
again,
they just.
again,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, of
and
course.
there's obvious benefits to the fact that you're appreciating someone's culture. But I guess because also Aboriginal spirituality, that it's not. I mean, there's dreaming now that is written, but mostly it's oral. So there's it's given generation
Yeah.
to generation orally. So there's no book that you can check
Mm.
with like that. This is the practice, right? So there's also that. There's no, set dates of Ramadan when you know that people are not going to be doing their best because it's just, it's you can have someone call you up and say, I don't know, yeah, now the stingray is my spirit animal and it's in season now, and I have to go and 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 fish, which can be well, and it's not the end of the world. Again, it's that concept of I don't turn up to work. It's not the end of the world. It's the end. The sun's still gonna come up and the
It's
trees are still
just,
gonna
yeah,
fruit, and
yeah, I
it's
know.
all gonna.
No, no, I agree. It's just this totally and completely different mindset,
Yeah.
a different type of governance, a different type of trade, which I think, we're trying to understand. And that's why it's so important the work that academics do around them. Not speaking on behalf of them, but try to figure it out what's going on. There was something that I wanna, go in depth because this is basically your area, which is kind of more related to enterprises and gender. Okay, so you reference Ricky's organization, and it's purposefully, no, sorry, it's all female First Nations board, right? Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. So, which is basically like, as you put it before, female based around the organization. See, what can organizations learn from indigenous approaches to gender balance, leadership, and collective decision making? Because you
Mm.
said, okay, I really like the approach that you gave before about leadership. Okay, leadership, it doesn't mean that you are on the front, like the ancient Greeks or the Romans, the guy who leading troops to do whatever, or a female who is, but someone who is supportive. So I'm trying to figure it out. Okay, we have Ricky's example, yeah. So how can we learn from this balance in between gender balance, leadership, and collective decision making from this indigenous perspective?
Yeah, and I think that comes from being able to put your ego to the back and
Okay.
not in collective decision making, uh, I mean, there's a spokesperson more than a leader, right? Because there's a spokesperson that is then bringing together everybody's collective decision. So if if you are really running a horizontal decision making platform or organization, then it's not one particular person's decision and big generalization, but anecdotally and also in history, we know that women tend to be more collaborative, where they just collaborate more and kind of are able to bring forward that collective perspective of the circle and everyone involved. And when you're thinking about your whole community and how that's going to affect them, it and when you're putting the seven generations to the back and seven generations in the future, then yeah, you need to 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 bring all that together in a very complicated way. I think it might also be, I don't know, some kind of like divine, like um, thought or something, or organization. But yeah, I just from look, there has been some pretty horrible stories about Aboriginal and Indigenous first businesses that have gone really bad. One thing, for example, one example was that for a very long time, the Aboriginal flag was actually copyrighted by a First Nations business. Like people couldn't use it. You had to pay like
Wow.
like ridiculous amount of money to even just be able to use the flag. And this was a story that was shared actually in Brisbane at the World Forum. There was a lady there. Her social enterprise is called Clothe the Gap. So she started making T-shirts with the Aboriginal flag. And then one day she got a letter saying, cease and desist, which is kind of what we call, what the Australian equivalent of being sued for copyright. And
That's
she's like,
crazy.
I'm not gonna do that. Why? Who owns the flag? And it turns out that she did some research, and it turns out that the flag was owned by this businessman who was actually really corrupt and had just been fined $1 million for counterfeit Aboriginal art. And she's like, this person, this company does not deserve the royalties from our flag.
And he's
So,
from a First Nation, the
yeah,
young.
yeah, he was First Nations.
That's
Yeah, he was
yeah,
Aboriginal. So
that's crazy though.
there are some horror stories that go each way. So anyway, she was presenting and she's like, "Well, he messed with the wrong black woman because my family, they're all lawyers, and like I think her uncle was an attorney general or something like that." And then she's like, "So we took him on." Because obviously she had the resources, and that's why what we were talking about before, how in Australia the the journey is progressing so much because we have quite an equitable society, and we have people that have mixed and have gone to university and kind of have got big careers and stuff. And she was like, yeah, he messed with the wrong black woman, and they took him to court, they bankrupted him, and they took the rights of him. So now we can all use the flag. So they put it in the collective commons, which is great because
That's
now we can wear
crazy.
t-shirts with the flag, we can have the flags outside. Before it's just so rare to actually see an Aboriginal flag.
Intellectual property. So he was owned by. That's crazy. But that's also so interesting, right? Because I like this critical approach. Okay. No, everything
Came to
is
the right
good,
place.
right? No, no, but it's true. No, everything is super over positive, right? It doesn't mean like everything is perfect, and now we're gonna say, oh, the answers of the modern world is in the ancient practices. Maybe some, but not all of them, right? So, which I think is something that we're gonna find out in your upcoming chapter, okay, that you are working on. I think, Davi, we have a lot to cover. I would
Yeah.
propose maybe let's see what how it's coming up this chapter, and maybe we need no maybe no we definitely need another episode of this
Okay.
concept of
We have been
Australia.
talking for a while.
Yeah, it's 1 hour and a half. And there is so many things to talk about because as you said, it's not a simple topic, right? You really
No,
need to understand. But I think to sum up, I think it's very important what you put it into the table. There is definitely a different approach for businesses from the Australian perspective, acknowledging that is not homogeneous, right? That there are a lot of diversities among the First Nations communities in Australia among themselves. Uh, Nature is important, leadership is important, kinship is important, deep listening is important. So it's a lot to go through. Honestly, I'm looking
there's a
forward for the
very
chapter. Yeah.
there's a really nice verse that um, I really like, and a lot of like First Nations business people use even at the very beginning of any relationship that every transaction needs 3 cups of tea. One
Okay.
cup of tea, you tell me about you. The next cup of tea, I will tell you about me. And then the third cup of tea is when we talk about business. It's it's a deeper practice of, nothing happens until we have a relationship.
Wow, that's so crazy. I'm actually typing this down. Yeah.
And I think I'm feeling like that's definitely gonna go in the chapter. Like the 3 cups of tea.
100%. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And talk about business. Okay, so just to finish this fantastic conversation, promising to have another episode when we have already like in the production of the book. What do you think, indigenous philosophy matters today? What do you think is so important to, what we do? Gather different people from all over the world and talk about their perspective about their indigenous communities in different regions. What do you think it matters?
I think it matters because we have got a lack of connection at the moment, and I truly believe that that's one of the biggest, most wicked problems that we have. Are we have lost, or not everyone, obviously, it is a big generalization, but there's a sense of a connection lost, and we're looking for something deeper. We keep on looking in consumerism. We keep on looking in social media. We keep on looking in more and more and more and more. But there's the sense of unfulfillment. And it's not just me saying this, a lot of there's a lot of writers that say this, that we are lacking a sense of connection. And First Nations culture are all about connection. And maybe that's where the missing link is. Maybe that connection to land and to each other that is so visible and so evident in a lot of First Nations philosophies, that could easily be the trick. And it's it sounds hard, but it's actually not. Because when you break it down, it's just connection. It's human to human, human to nature. It's
Yeah.
not far. It's something that you can do instantaneous by yourself. And for free, to have connection with somebody. It's not something that's unattainable. It's just coming in your body, activating your listening, and just being present, and then connection will form if it goes both ways. So if there are two people that are intentionally coming together for whatever reason, then why are we missing out on forming deep connections with them? Why are we so afraid to
100%.
form deep connections with our business partners or the person at the checkout? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Deep connection is not going to hurt us. It might make our lives a bit more livable and, our day a little bit better. But I think we have, again, big generalization, but media kind of feeds us this fear that deep connection could put us at risk when it's actually the the malice behind the deep connection that is putting us at risk, not actually the element of connection. And connection is actually what could protect you from that malice, because if you're trying to form a connection with someone and you feel that their connection is not genuine or sincere, then you're going to pull back. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that we can take away from First Nations practices, is that it is okay to connect authentically and deeply with other human beings and with nature.
Well, thank you. Thank you for such a good closure. And the last one before we basically hung up is what would you suggest for those who want to learn about Australian indigenous led enterprises or indigenous led social enterprises? What they have to read, or maybe just to Google what they have to do?
Oh, wow. Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot. Oh, I mean, best thing to do is to come here, really. Come and meet the people, come and feel the land, come feel the spirit. But obviously,
Great.
I don't think the immigration department's gonna like that too much.
I know,
Especially with
right?
how things are at the moment. There has been some terrible protests just a few months before. We've got a homelessness crisis in Australia, and unfortunately, some far right groups have taken that on board as kind of, being related to immigration. The saddest thing of the whole thing was that this anti-immigration group actually raided a First Nations camp in Melbourne that has been there for a very long time, which sounds comical in a way because the anti-immigration rally was made out of white people who are technically migrants to Australia. So, yeah,
The paradox.
yeah.
That's crazy.
But
Just
uh,
come over, experience your native, and then you
there's a
can.
really good book called Dark Emu.
Okay, okay, I like
Dark
it.
emu it's and look, there's been debates about it not being real, but I don't think so. I actually really like it. The name of the author is Bruce Pascoe, and he writes about Australian business practice, First Nations business practices and trade before white settlement. And
Wow.
Yeah, and it shows how, and there's the farming practices in it, detailed in it, and trading practices, and lots of really interesting stats and history in that book. It's definitely a big recommendation.
Okay. Okay, Davi, thank you so much. And the last one, let's make a photo to just
Yeah,
to,
okay. Choo choo. Yeah, no glasses. So.
to let's do it. Here you go. Thank you so much, Davi.
Got
We
it.
definitely need to
Okay.
do another episode, and I'm looking forward for the
Yes,
chapter.
we
Okay.
do. And yes, and we need to talk about next year too, because I'm thinking of coming to Europe in May-ish. You around at that time?
Fantastic. Yes,
Yeah?
100%. So you're
Cool.
gonna be welcome, of course.
Oh, I just want to
Oh,
see you and
oh, thank you. Are you
Sarah and the
bringing
kids.
River over?
Yes, yes, for
Oh,
sure.
fantastic. That's even
Yeah.
better. Cool.
Yeah, gonna do a month
Okay.
in Malta and then come and see you. Anyway, let me know
Okay.
how it all
Davi,
goes. We'll meet again.
thank you. Goodbye.
No
Thank you
worries.
for your time.
Ciao.